Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew, and welcome back to Frames of Space. There is one question that I've been meaning to raise in more of my podcasts, which is a question of cause and effect. What is actually driving the shifts that we see, the massive shifts in politics, media, and power? And what do those shifts feel like from the inside? Now, this episode is all about one of those invisible but massively influential forces in American politics, which is that of public opinion polling. Who conducts it? What goes into it? And how much should we actually trust it? And that's where today's guest comes in. Today's guest is Lakshya Jain, a political data analyst and co-founder of Split Ticket, a data journalism project known for its sharp election modeling and nonpartisan vote breakdowns. He currently leads the polling operation over at The Argument, a magazine devoted to making the persuasive case for liberal democracy, not by avoiding political conflict, but by engaging it head-on. And that really captures the energy that Lakshya brings to this conversation. Lakshya is part of a newer generation of pollsters and modelers, where they are trying to predict elections, and they're also trying to test theories. Theories like, what kind of messages persuade? Which candidates are actually gaining traction with swing voters? And where do traditional metrics of political success, like polling averages or issue salience, where do they fall short? Take, for instance, the rise of Zohran Mamdani, the Muslim socialist who just got elected as the mayor of New York City. If you've been following Mamdani's campaign, you know that he's one of the most online politicians in America. When he was campaigning, his messages to the electorate were loud, clear, and incredibly focused. And it worked. But how much should Democrats actually learn from his campaign? Should they move further to the left on economics like he was? Should they talk more about affordability like he did? Or should they simply be more vocal on social media in order to get more attention? These are the types of questions that make up the core of this conversation, which is really about the gap between data and narrative. What do polls actually capture? What do they leave out? And how should campaigns, or even just politically curious people, how should they navigate that space in between? So as you've probably gathered, this is an episode about numbers. But it is also a conversation about meaning, about what people want from their leaders, and what we owe to the people that we're trying to persuade. Now here's my conversation with Lakshya Jain. Hope you enjoy. Lakshya Jain, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto this podcast.
Thanks, Andrew. Really excited.
So first things first, you're obviously a pollster. Tell me why. Like, what made you decide to get into polling in the first place?
I think for me, it's just the ability to test theories on your own and perform data analysis that gives you real insights into the way the world works is so much more insightful than just, reading what people have to say and hoping that it's all correct. There's just so much value in being able to check your work yourself.
All right, that's interesting. So if you're a pollster, do you have some kind of magic formula where when you look at a poll, you can just automatically tell whether a poll is high quality or low quality?
It's not that you can automatically tell, but there are certain rules that you can follow to figure out whether the pollster is actually any good. Firstly, look at their data collection procedures. How transparent are they about that? Secondly, how do they describe their weighting procedures? How transparent are they about what their poll screen looks like? Third, what are the types of questions they ask? Are they unbiased? Are they loaded in any way? These are all just tells that you can have. And I think like the process of seeing all of that really helps. And over time, you start to figure out whether the poll is really worth anything.
All right, so maybe there are like a bunch of different tells that add up cumulatively. So how much like how do you know? Let's take your polling. You do polling for the Argument magazine. How do you know that your polling A is particularly accurate, and B, how do you know that it's particularly useful compared to the fact that there are so many like high profile pollsters out there like Nate Silver and Nate Cohn? Like what do you what do you provide to the picture, and how do you know that your polling can be particularly accurate compared to theirs?
Yeah. I think the way that I would see it is that, you know, I don't think our polls are infallible by any means. I am sure that we have blind spots and things that we get wrong. But on the whole, I believe our polls are pretty trustworthy, and here's why. We have them designed by a series, not just by me, but we have them reviewed by a series of experts before they go in the field. So we screen for question bias. Secondly, we made sure to weight by a lot of different factors that most pollsters just don't do. Like we make sure we have the right number of white Democrats and white Republicans, the right number of young Democrats, young white people, young non-white people, and so forth. So our crosstabs make a lot more sense in that sense because we make sure that we have a good balance per demographic, so they're representative. And this is especially important because we're trying to do issue polling. And, you know, like there, it's not just about the top line, it's about how each group feels about the issue. So the crosstabs are even more important. And then lastly, I would say like the one thing that we do that a lot of pollsters don't, especially a lot of the lower quality ones, is we validate our voters against the voter file. And this is really critical because we only take voters that are on the voter file. We eliminate bots. We make sure we screen very tightly for them. We check for straight liners and people who don't answer sincerely. So I have a decent amount of confidence that our surveys mean something.
All right. So one thing that I found fascinating is that you keep saying we in that answer, and it made me realize that maybe I should make sure that I don't put the cart before the horse. I'm guessing that when you say we, you're referring to the Argument magazine as a whole.
That is correct. We means the argument, or when we do polls as split ticket, means split ticket.
All right. What is the Argument and what is split ticket?
Yeah, so the argument is a modern day hub for liberalism. It aims to persuasively make the case for liberal policies and liberal governance, and in a way that embraces quite literally the argument. Like it's meant to make a persuasive case, and we don't shy away from debates or debating. And that's really critical because I think for too long, we on the left have been a little bit afraid of talking about ideas that don't really fit super well with things that we believe. And I think that needs to change. And so that's the big thing. That's one thing that I really believe we have to fix. And I'm very, very happy that at a place like the Argument, I get to test a whole bunch of theories that I care about and that I, you know, believe in and don't believe in, and see like what does the public think about it. And with respect to what Split Ticket is, Split Ticket was the data analysis, election data analysis org that I had founded with a bunch of my friends in order to analyze and model election data in a nonpartisan manner. And I think we've had a great run of success, and I was very thankful for the exposure that we got.
Yeah. So I do think that you've done great work at Split Ticket. And with regards to the Argument, I promise you that I am going to try to take some of the Argument's argumentative flair or debative flair with you right now. How much do you think the average person actually needs to know about your work? Like, is it important for, like, obviously people talk a lot about civic engagement and how it's important for people to be politically engaged. Do you think people actually need to know about the way that polls work, or do you think that's just like insider baseball knowledge that people don't actually need to know?
Yeah, I think, you know, like the average person needing to know about us is a bit of a stretch. Like, I don't think, like, for example, the soccer mom in Des Moines, Iowa is going to know about us, nor do they need to. But I think, like, we reach a critical subset of politically engaged people with a lot of say in policy and politics and policymaking. And I think that group is extremely important. There's a large audience there, and we aim to make the case with that group specifically and with people who follow politics in general, like the more intense group that tends to follow politics a lot. We try to reach them and make a persuasive case for liberalism and embrace debate and see, where liberalism might have gone wrong recently.
So maybe like if the argument is meant for those types of people, maybe you're meant for like the very specific subset of people, like the types of Substack readers that are constantly like refreshing Nate Silver's Trump approval rating page. Is that who you're for?
I'd say we're for a little bit broader audience than that. Nate has his audience and he has a great blog. I subscribe to it. And I think, Nate has branched out a little bit too. I think that the audience for people who want to hear about policy is a little bit, it's similar to, but it's not exactly the same as the audience that obsessively refreshes polls.
Do you think that Nate Silver has been a net positive or a net negative for public perception of your industry and polling more broadly?
Unquestionably a net positive. Nate Silver has done more, in my opinion, to bring numbers to politics and show people where their preconceptions break down and what's really going to happen in an election. He has done more for that than any figure in recent memory, in my opinion.
All right. What do you think of the rise of betting markets? Do you think it's good, bad, a nuisance, or do you think it's just any other thoughts?
Do I think betting markets are good? I will say this. I don't bet, but I believe that they provide some useful information. I think there's value in knowing what people with money on, in the game actually believe. And I think the betting markets basically take polling and then they add a little bit of information on them. I think that's valuable.
Nice. So I would say that the past 10 minutes have been incredibly useful in terms of like painting like some metaphorical canvas about you, your work, and all that stuff. Maybe it's time to get to brass tacks, because I want to see how your polling intersects with a lot of the electoral performances within American politics that we've seen more broadly. So
Sure.
First question, how did Democrats perform in the 2025 election?
I think they did great. I mean, they won New Jersey by 14. They won Virginia by over 15%. I don't know anyone that thinks that they could reasonably have done much better.
All right. How did they do in comparison to the off elections that they had in 2017?
They did better. I think that's a critical point to note, that they really did a lot better in 2025. They got better turnout. They got even more persuasion. Phil Murphy ended up in 2017, actually. Phil Murphy won by, I think, slightly less than Mikey Sherrill did, which is extremely impressive. So, or by the same amount. So it's like, I think on the whole, Democrats just blew their 2017 out of the water.
That's really fascinating. So on the one hand, I am inclined to be cheering with you. That is good news. But there is like another part of me in the back of my head. Like, this is the part of me that is constantly refreshing Nate Silver's page about Trump's approval rating, where it wants to ask you a question, which is, Trump's approval rating was much lower in 2017 than it is now. Like, it was a net negative in both cases, but it was much more negative 8 years ago. So why are Democrats doing so much better in the 2025 elections than they did in the 2017 elections, if in both cases Trump was the reason why Democrats won?
I don't know that it's true that Donald Trump was much more unpopular in 2017. If you look at his tracker right now, I would say I'd be very surprised if they weren't neck and neck in terms of unpopularity, because I think Trump was just as unpopular in November 2025 as he was in November of 2017, if you look at the numbers.
Do you want to do the annoying podcast interlude thing where we try doing a little bit of Googling to see if that's...
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
I think you would find them within like maybe like 1% or 2% of each other. Like, I think it's very, very close.
I'm going to try to see, so let's take compare, like, say, let's beginning of October 2025 compared to beginning of October 2017. And
No, no, take it now. You got to take it now, right? You have to take the approval rating now rather than the approval rating in October, because if you're looking at the elections, those happened just last week. So the polls right now are literally the polls that just got taken right after the election. Like that's Trump's unpopularity on election day in 2017 versus now. So you should just compare how their approval ratings are now.
Do you think the government shutdown played a large role in Trump's decreasing approval rating?
I think so. I mean, I think you can't govern the way Trump has and then still expect to be bailed out by, well, the Democrats didn't provide the votes to get over the filibuster. Like, no, if your view is of an imperial presidency, then voters are going to say that you should use that imperial presidency to reopen the government.
Yeah. So I am inclined to agree with you that the government shutdown did play a big role. But that is kind of fascinating because you technically did write a piece like in the early phase of the government shutdown where you argued that like by the end, everyone was going to forget about the government shutdown, where you said you basically said that it wasn't going to affect public opinion at all. Is this like a minor mea culpa from you in that regard?
No, because the shutdown was going on at the time of the elections, right? The shutdown isn't going to matter once the shutdown ends and people forget about it. And then 3 months later, their attention moves on. But their attention has not moved on yet because the shutdown just ended today.
All right. So if the shutdown ended a week before the election started, do you think that would have had an effect on the election results?
I think so. If you look at the piece we wrote, it was that the government shutdown doesn't have any mid to long-term impacts. Like 2 months later, for example, 2 months after the shutdown, I think we had cited quite literally like what was the post-shutdown polling and then what was like the final generic ballot. Like the post-shutdown polling was like 1 month after the government reopens, right? And like 1 week is not enough time. 1 month starts to get to that time.
Do you think? Sorry, go ahead.
So I think if the shutdown had lasted a week, or if it was early September to early October, I don't think it would have had much of an impact on the elections in New Jersey, for example. I think Virginia is a little bit of a special case because the shutdowns quite literally impact a lot of the federal workforce, of which Virginia has a lot. But nationally, that's not a big thing. But I think, for example, New Jersey wouldn't have seen like a shutdown-related impact if the government had reopened in early October.
So if you're saying that people aren't going to remember this like several months down the line, do you think that Trump's approval rating, like give it a few months and Trump's approval rating will boomerang back up to what it was a few months ago? Do you think that's plausible?
I don't know. And here's why. Most presidents just don't get popular in their second year. Like there's very few presidents that see their popularity go up. Usually once you get yourself in that hole, you don't really come out of it. And I think it's because like once people get mad, they start seeing all types of different reasons to stay mad at you.
Yeah, so maybe this government shutdown is going to matter in the long run because it's digging Donald Trump into a hole that he can't get out of because it's his second year.
Yeah, though, right? And it's also his second term. Voter opinion of him has been baked in at this point.
Yeah. All right. How high? So like going back to the 2025 election results, how high was voter turnout in this year's elections compared to previous off-year elections?
I think it's like actually turnout in Virginia might have been slightly less as a percent of registered voters. And I think like if you look, for example, at turnout in, I think turnout in Virginia might have been slightly lower. I think turnout in New Jersey was slightly higher. Off the top of my head, though, it's not like I don't really think that turnout was that much change, at least in Virginia from 2017. It definitely went up in New York City. That much I will say. But like in Virginia, it was really a lot more Democrats showed up and then fewer Republicans showed up.
Do you find any of that notable or interesting given this current state of American politics?
I mean, I think so. I think like it's interesting to look at the coalition differences and see who turns out in what volume.
Yeah. So why do you think it was the case that Democrats turned out in higher rates and Republicans turned out in lower rates?
I think it's like a coalitional thing where like the Democrats, really they have a high propensity coalition and they show up a lot.
Yeah.
That's basically what happened.
All right. So like given how well Democrats did, I do wonder, Do you think people might be overestimating how important this year's elections are compared to the future? Because obviously they're not a presidential election, but they're not even midterm. Like the actual number of seats that were up for grabs is pretty small in the large, like the grand scheme of things. Do you think people might be overestimating the Democrats' victory?
I don't know because the midterms are, look, these weren't low turnout elections. These were higher turnout elections than the midterms were in 2022 for Virginia and New Jersey, right? Like these actually were pretty high turnout elections. And it's not a surprise because governor races are decently high turnout. I would say that like these probably do tell us something about 2026. They don't tell us something about 28, but they do tell us something about 2026.
What do you think they tell us about 2026?
I would say the Democrats are favorites in 26 off of this. I think you can expect a pretty blue year in 2026 based on these results.
All right. How do you think? All right, maybe that is a good segue into the next question. How do you think? Like, what is your current prediction? Obviously, like anything can happen in a year. But what is your general like 95% confidence interval about how you think that Democrats will do in 2026?
I'd say something between like a 3 and 9 point victory, and then like that's probably my bounds of what I think is going to happen.
Nice. All right. What is your over-under on whether Democrats will be able to successfully retake the Senate in 2026?
I'd say they get like a 49 seats. I don't think they're going to get 50 or 51. I think they have like a 30% chance of flipping the Senate, but it's going to be tough.
All right, 30% chance. So 30% chance would be like, it's very unlikely, but it is still possible if they play their cards right. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah. So what are the cards that Democrats need to play correctly if they want to retake the Senate next year and therefore prevent a lot of the nonsense nominations of people like Pete Hegseth in the future?
I think what they have to do is they have to pick the right candidates. They have to get the right matchups. I don't know if they're going to do that. Like in Maine, Graham Plattner, who's a problematic nominee, looks like he may actually be very competitive for the nomination. Now, he might win just because it's blue, period. Like it's just a blue state. But like, I think it's, it makes it tougher than it should be. And then when it comes to just when it comes to like, places like Georgia, they should hold their incumbents. I don't have much doubt about that. But in Texas, for example, they need to stretch the map. And I don't know if they can do that with Jasmine Crockett as the nominee, if she's the one that gets it. So my opinion is that I think the Democrats have their work cut out for them, for sure.
What type of attributes do you think Democratic candidates need in order to win swing districts or even red districts in order to retake the Senate?
I think Democrats probably need, like, I guess, what do you mean by that? I could take that many different ways. So I'll ask you to go down a little bit in more detail.
All right. So, like, give me examples of Democratic politicians or Democratic personalities that you think should be emulated to a greater extent for the people that are running in Ohio or whatever.
Okay, I would say like people in Ohio, folks like Jared Golden, for example, or like I would say like the more populist Democrats, the more populist blue-collar Democrats, so to say, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, Jared Golden, Mary Peltola, those folks. Now, I think that's unrealistic to expect for most Democrats across the country, but I think someone like Jon Ossoff, who's made like fighting corruption his calling card, I think that could be pretty pertinent and very useful to look at. Like, I think someone like that is really a good example.
All right. Do you think you might be drawing the ire of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party when you say that?
No, I don't think so. I think the progressive wing of the party likes Jon Ossoff. I feel like they would be pretty on board with setting him as a model, an informal model, so to say, for the Democrats.
All right. Are there any specific Democratic politicians that would draw the ire of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, but you still think that they should run?
Oh, yeah. I think it would have been nice if Jared Golden chose to run again instead.
So what specific attributes does Jared Golden have that you think would have allowed him to win over like a relatively Trumpy area?
I think the specific characteristics that Jared Golden had is that he genuinely pushes back on his party a lot. And he has a couple of views that are very specific to rural-ish, like very rural areas that are very gun-friendly, deeply skeptical of both parties. He is not afraid to work across the aisle, and he consistently sends signals and platforms and policies of moderation. And that, I think, really matters.
Yeah. So moderation is the key word. Do you think that? So I would say that over the past 3 years or so, Democrats have significantly moderated from where they were during the peak of the Great Awakening or whatever. Do you think that Democrats need to moderate their messaging and policy even more than they have over the past few years?
I mean, I think so, right? Like, I think they need a focus change. They need to talk more about economics than they do about culture war stuff. And I think they've been making strides on this. Like, if you look at Spanberger and Sherrill, I think that was pretty useful. And then I think on top of that, they're going to need a policy change on immigration because they're very out of step with what Americans want. But hey, funny things happen. I do think they need to change a bit on crime and immigration. I don't really think the other stuff matters as much as those two do, but I think those two they probably need to change on.
So crime and immigration, would you say that those are the two issues that the Democratic Party is in most need of moderating?
I would say so, yeah, especially crime.
Yeah. Why crime?
I think crime is just a problem for Democrats because, firstly, it happens in a lot of the blue cities, right? Like, that's where most people are. So even though the rates may be lower than, say, like rural Oklahoma, they're going to get more press in like San Francisco or New York. And on top of that, like COVID really did get accompanied by a spike in crime that then, combined with the surge in immigration, led to the electorate positioning itself against crime and immigration both. And I think like those two things did real meaningful and lasting damage to the Democratic Party that people haven't really fully recovered from yet.
Yeah, but do you think that there is like any point at which, like, if the Democrats like move further and further to the right on these issues, then like there's some point at which people will forgive them? Or do you think that there is some way in which the disinformation machine from Republicans will cause people to blame Democrats regardless of how much they've moved to the right on these issues?
No, I think that broadly people respond to the policy messages you put out, right? Like, but you have to be consistent about it. And you can't do what Kamala Harris did and only flip at the last minute 3 months before the election. People aren't going to trust that. I think you have to do it consistently and you have to keep hammering at it over a period of time so people actually believe it.
This reminds me of something that's very interesting. Forgive me if I sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but what do you think are the main blunders that Kamala Harris made in the 3 months leading up to the election?
I think the biggest one was just not running hard enough away from Joe Biden.
Were there any other issues that you think that she flipped on that where it was too soon or too late or anything else like that?
No, I think what it was is that Kamala Harris was a very progressive senator. She was the second most progressive senator in the United States Senate by voting record. And then she goes to the presidency or the vice presidency. And like people don't really see her. They don't really have an impression of her. And they think like, she's still a pretty lefty person. And she runs in 24 and she tries to make all these pivots to the center, but people weren't buying it. Like, I guess to some degree you can say it may have helped here or there, but broad reality is, she didn't really do much to change the minds of people because they're not going to buy a switch at the last minute. And like, it makes sense, right? If someone spends their entire time being something, then says right away, I'm actually something else, you're not going to believe that.
Yeah. But I think one of the benefits that we have right now is that like a lot of the Democratic politicians that are new, that are up and coming, they can have certain positions where they weren't front and center in people's minds in years past. So nowadays they get to be seen as like new or novel or even as outsiders. What would you say to the idea that Zohran Mamdani provides a model for how future Democrats should campaign for office?
I would say that Zohran is someone who provides a bunch of lessons in some ways, but not in others. Like, I think it's really meaningful to note the crazy youth turnout he got and see like how he did it. But you can't really put Zohran as a national model. He's not very popular nationally, and it shouldn't be surprising because people nationally are skeptical of socialism in a way that they're not in New York City.
So do you think that Zohran Mamdani is like a very unique case that is not, like, you can't extrapolate from him beyond New York?
I mean, I think the lessons that I take from Zohran are that, like, look, socialism happens to be pretty unpopular, for example, and, like, I don't really think it's too big of a change to say that, like, hey, that isn't really, like, something you should try nationally. But then I also think that on the whole, someone like Zohran is provides value for the Democratic Party by showing them how focusing on affordability impacts different subgroups. Like, focusing on affordability enabled them to leapfrog a bunch of established elected politicians into office. Now, if moderates are looking to get their own candidates to come up in the Democratic Party, well, realize that a focus on affordability and a willingness to go everywhere can really help your cause too. There's no reason it should be limited to Zohran only. That's my thought. Like, I just don't think that Zohran is a model for Democrats nationally. I think he's very unpopular, but I also think that, like, you don't have to take Zohran nationally in order to find anything useful from his campaign.
You don't think there was anything useful about his ad campaign or his social media campaign?
I would say that for Zohran, I mean, the real unique part was that everything on his website was just affordability. He tied everything back to affordability, and that was unique.
Why was it unique? Why weren't other Democrats campaigning on that if that seems to be such a winning message?
I think it's that Democrats kind of everything bagel a lot of things. They try to just talk about too many things, and then in the process, they don't end up talking about the things that matter.
So why was Zohran unique? Why was he exempt from the everything bagel liberalism that other Democratic politicians weren't?
I think he had to be, right? He started as a backbencher. He started as a backbench assembly member. So really, like, for him, he kind of had to have something unique to really leapfrog himself up to the front of the field.
Yeah, but maybe that leapfrogging into the front of the field, maybe that coincides with a little bit with Ezra Klein's theory of attention. I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but there is something to the idea that it's not just popularity that you need. It's also the ability to, like, harness the power of social media or just, like, the general telecommunications technology environment that you currently live in, and harness that better than all of your competitors are able to do. So, like, back in 2008, part of the reason why Barack Obama won, even though he was an outsider, is because he was able to take use of telecommunications technology of that age, like cable television, in a far more swift and a far more deft way than a lot of his competitors. And part of the reason why Donald Trump won in 2016 is because social media, like, he was able to harness social media, and obviously we didn't know how harmful the incentives of social media were back then. But in hindsight, it seems pretty clear that he was able to harness the incentives of social media and the way that it almost sort of incentivizes his behavior and his tendency to dunk on people. Do you think that Zohran Mamdani, in the year 2025, he was able to take advantage of the modern telecommunications technology of this day and age in a way that other candidates were not able to do?
I think so, in that, like, it's kind of impressive that a Muslim socialist is a mayor. I think part of that is because he just went everywhere and talked about everything. But, like, we should know that Zohran's numbers weren't that good. Like, his popularity isn't amazing nationally. He's not really that strong of a candidate himself. I think that, like, it still is useful to look at how good of a turnout he got. But, like, I just worry, like, there are real lessons and real takeaways from Mamdani's campaign, but, like, trying to replicate him is not really, like, the way to go. I think it's like, look at the underlying things he did and see if there's anything you can capture. To your point, like, the attention network and, like, capturing attention on media does matter, but the message has to be something people care about, right? Like, yeah, go on the media and advocate for things that you care about in a passionate, persuasive, and charismatic way. but don't just assume that the louder you are, the more people are going to listen to you. That's not really the way it works.
Yeah, but maybe Zohran, like the fact that he was so loud is part of why his turnout was so high. Would you agree?
Um, I mean, I don't know about that. Like, it's kind of unfalsifiable, but what I will say is that with Zohran, um, he's he's definitely he's definitely very talented. Number one, like you don't get from backbench assembly member to actual mayor without having some serious talent. But secondly, with Zohran, like he got a lot of turnout against him too, and like I think it's useful that he got such high youth turnout. I think it's good for Democrats to look at, but like I don't know if it's true that like because the thing is, Zohran got pretty bad margins. He got great turnout, but he did really badly in persuasion, which was just something useful there that I think like we should look more at to see like, can you get that level of turnout without getting that persuasion drag against you?
I guess I have a pet theory about this, which is that like over time, communications technology has improved to the point where it's become so algorithmized that it like incentivizes our base natures. Like I'm sure, like obviously you work for the argument, so you're familiar with all of those articles that Jordan Wiseman has written about how social media is bad for you. I think one of the more perverse aspects of social media is that it incentivizes that you dunk on people or insult people in a bad faith way. And I think that in some ways, the reason why Zohran Mamdani's turnout, both for him and against him, were so high is because he was able to weaponize telecommunications technology in a way that maximized the most amount of attention that he would have gotten with the current technological environment, which in some cases incentivized him to dunk on people in a way that Obama wasn't incentivized to do because of the nature of 2008 communications technology. Will you agree with my pet theory?
I see value in it. I don't know that I fully agree with it, but I see value in it. And I think there are elements that are correct, right? Like Zohran is objectively, well, in my opinion, he's one of the best people on TV that the Democrats have had in a long time. Like he starts with a baseline, very unpopular ideology, and he's able to punch way above his weight. And there is actual value in that. It's all about the margin. So yeah.
All right. So then I promise you that this is the last question I'll ask about Zohran Mamdani. What do you think are the right lessons and the wrong lessons for Democrats to learn about his victory for the New York mayoral election?
I think the right lessons are that like affordability really matters and that people care a lot about it. And that if you talk exclusively about affordability, there's no reason that you can't catapult to prominence. And I think that even Democrats care a lot about that. You don't need to go run to the left necessarily like Zohran did. You don't need to do that, I think, to like have power in the affordability message, but like you need to talk about affordability at the minimum. And Zohran really did that. Like he centered it first and foremost, and that was just super important. Now, the wrong lessons, I don't think Democrats need to take him nationally. I don't think they need to replicate his platform. I don't think you need to be calling for rent freezes in like Omaha or whatever. I just think that like, there are right lessons and wrong lessons, and the wrong one would be like, hey, we need to run this guy, clones of this guy in every other city, and we need to like have our swing district representatives take a page from his playbook and advocate for the things he's saying. Like, I don't think that would be the right move.
All right. So thank you for that very, very interesting monologue about the nature of Zohran Mamdani and what we could potentially take or not take from him. There's another thing that's been on my mind, which is that like one potential criticism that people have about the Democratic establishment is that they're way too focused on metrics and analytics and all of that jazz to the point where it prevents them from feeling authentic or just doing what like seems to be the good idea on instinct rather than what all of these numbers say. So what would you say to the idea that politicians listen to pollsters too often these days?
I actually don't know how much value I put into that. I think what is true is that like politicians are afraid to say what they really want to say and are afraid to stand on what they believe in. I think that is like something really important, and I think that is something really essential to recognize and understand. I believe personally that Democrats don't really have the spine to stand on what they want to do. And instead, so you get like a whole bunch of Democrats talking about dog whistle moderation. And what I mean by that is like they'll say, we need to moderate, we need a bigger tent, but they don't actually do anything to do that. They just talk about it. And it's because like they're afraid to see a tactic all the way through because they get paralysis and they're like, are we doing the right thing? And then they just do something else. Perfect example of this is in government shutdown, right? They were winning the fight. They were winning the public opinion fight on the government shutdown. And then they chose to say, actually, never mind, I don't want to do this. And like, what was the point of getting in this if you didn't want to follow it all the way through?
Yeah, so it's almost as if this is another pet theory that is kind of non-falsifiable, but I do wonder if the left has like overly neurotic tendencies that cause them to overthink decisions that they should just like do, whereas the right is populated by people who just do things without thinking. Like, for example, Trump is someone who always does things without like thinking about things that much. So I do wonder if like the left overthinks compared to the right, which doesn't think hard enough.
I think the right has its own problems with thinking at all. When it comes to the left, I think the biggest thing is that the Democrats, yeah, they do overthink, but more than that, I think they just don't have a coherent view of what they actually want to do.
Maybe part of the reason why is because they listen to pollsters and pollsters tell them that like these views that they believe are incredibly unpopular. So part of the reason why they don't feel like they're standing for something is because they want to stand for issues that they strongly believe in, like pro LGBT issues or whatever. And they're afraid of saying it because they know that the pollsters tell them that it's extremely unpopular, so they sound wishy-washy as a result. Would you consider that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens is that like they say something, then they're like, oh, well, I don't know if I really should have said that. Then they change their mind and whatever. Like, I think there's many ways forward for the Democratic Party. You could go Bernie 2016, like left on economics, kind of heterodox, weird on culture, like Bernie was conservative on immigration or whatever. You could go Blue Dogs, which are just like moderate on a whole ton of things. But like, and either of those would work. But I think like both of those have like a conviction at the core of them. And then whatever the hell the Democratic institutionalism was between 2017 and 2024, like there's no appetite for that.
So like, hey, that brings me to an interesting counterfactual I'd like your opinion on. Let's say that Bernie beat Hillary for the 2016 primary. Do you think he would have beaten Trump in the general election?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I believe so.
So like what specific views or what specific personality did he have that allowed him to be more electable than Trump?
Bernie was for universal health care, but he was anti-immigration. And that's a pretty powerful concept in American politics. Now, I don't agree with the anti-immigration part, but it is, if you're going to be pro-universal health care, the way to appeal to culturally conservative voters is to also be anti-immigration.
It's kind of like how David Shore often says that the public tends to agree with Democrats on economic issues, whereas they tend to agree with Republicans on social issues. So maybe if Bernie had won the primary in 2016, he would have been elected because he would have been a lot more aligned with voters on economic issues, whereas he would not have like gone a lot more woke on social issues in the way that Hillary Clinton did. I wonder if that's the case. Yeah. Do you think, so just going back to the 2025 elections, obviously in the 2024 election, there was a lot of talk about the nature of gender polarization. The idea that men and women were splitting apart, especially in terms of vote share, where men tended to vote more Republican and women tended to vote more Democrat. How big was gender polarization in this year's election compared to last year's?
It was pretty big. I think it was the biggest in recent memory. And, it was massive. And I think a big reason is when you have, so women candidates do better with women and worse with men. And then Trump especially does pretty well with men. And so you have this thing where like, Harris being a woman really helped her with female voters and then hurt her with men. And then on top of that, post 2018 or so, you really saw a whole ton of gender polarization in places all across the world, right? Norway, South Korea, It's not just the United States. It was a global effort or a global effect.
Yeah, but that makes me kind of curious. We have both the 2014 election data and we have the results of the 2025 election. Do you think that Democrats in general, do you think we have a better idea of how Democrats can win back young men at the polls?
I think that comes and goes with the economy, more than anything. But I think like to win them back at the polls will take a real amount of effort that, frankly, I think will involve some policy change, being pro-nuclear a little bit more. I hate crypto, but like probably being a little bit more crypto and business friendly, like stock friendly. I think that helps win back young men. Like, I think that's the type of thing. Or you wait for the current president to crash the economy and then you just think maybe they'll just come back to you anyways. That's a strategy with value, by the way. Like, that's been done before.
I definitely agree that if Trump crashed the economy, then men would go back to voting Democratic. But I guess I do want your opinion on one thing. What would you say to the theory that wokeness played a large role in the rightward turn of Gen Z men last year and perhaps this year as well?
I wouldn't exactly disagree with it. I think like the economy did more, but I think it's useful to note that like in, Norway, etc., like you saw a swing to the right among the younger generations too. I think it's all downstream of economics though.
All right. So there was actually one quote that you did make about Gen Zers when you were making a guest appearance on The Bulwark that I thought was really cool. So I'm going to quote you right now. Quote, you're saying that when it comes to young people, the problem is that, quote, young people consistently feel nowadays, especially if you look at economic sentiment, if you look at the job market, they feel like every time they figure out the answers, the economy and the country change the questions. End quote. I thought that was really insightful. Could you unpack that a little bit more? I'd like to hear more of your take on this.
Sure. So my opinion is that in general, when young people are like looking at what they want to vote for, it's important to note that in a lot of ways, the cost of living crisis in this country is getting worse and worse. And you do all those things that you've been told to do as a kid, and what do you end up with? You end up with like crippling student debt. You end up with a really high youth unemployment rate like you have right now. And this is despite Gen Z being vastly more educated than like Gen X, for example. And it's like these people feel like they've done everything right, but somehow they're further behind than ever. Right? You can do everything right, and yet everything has gone wrong. And that's the way they feel. And I think like that's partly why there's so much anti-establishment attitude right now fermenting among that group. There always is. Young people love rebelling against authority, but to this degree, it's like very, very significant.
I'm inclined to agree with you. I think another thing that I would say is that like when you mentioned that the economy and the country changed the questions, that did get me thinking that part of the reason why it's not just that like cost of living has gone up. It's more that like the ways in which the world has gone better like require them to completely change their frame of mind if they want to succeed. Like all of this talk about crypto, all of this talk about how like theoretically you could become a social media influencer and make money that way. I think the world and the telecommunications technology is definitely impacting this, but I think that the nature of politics, the nature of technology, all of that is changing at a pace so rapid that like they can't rely on what they've been taught in order to succeed. They have to like constantly play 5D chess with both like their own metrics for what counts as success, but always like keeping up with every single aspect of how the world has been changing if they want to succeed. What would you say to that?
Yeah. I think like it's just in a very difficult time to keep up with all the change. And there's so much going on in the economy that's reshaping the way things look, especially with AI remaking the job market for young graduates. Like it's never been harder for them.
Yeah. So I have one last question about telecommunications technology. So I did tell you that I wasn't going to bring up the New York mayoral primary anymore, but there's one aspect of that that sort of I want to say something that's tangentially related to that, which is the nature of like how politicians can get ahead in the social media environment that we currently exist in. One that like one that deliberately exacerbates in-group, out-group differences if you want to get more attention, if you want to get more clicks. Do you think that in this current social media environment, dunking on other people has become a necessary evil in order to gain traction and attention from voters?
Unfortunately, people feel like that is the only way they can get attention. But the thing is, getting attention on social media isn't actually correlated with overperforming in elections. It really isn't. You don't need to dunk on social media in order to do well.
Maybe that's just like a misconception people have because they look at like the view counts or the like counts of those. Yeah. All right. So maybe if people like vastly overestimate how much dunking on people on social media helps your electoral performance, what do you think are some indicators that people don't pay enough attention to that might actually be much more beneficial?
Good question. My opinion, probably I would just look more at like, this is tough. Like I would say the biggest thing to look at is polling, because I actually think that's the most informative. I know that's not the answer that listeners may want to hear. So I think if you're looking at non-polling indicators, look at this, for example. Like, really, what exactly are people saying in districts that, consistently see like Democratic overperformances, for example? What are those representatives saying? Like, that's what tends to win elections more. These people have a very finely tuned radar for how to win voters. And you look at what they're saying, and you can get a sense of what's popular. And you talk to voters yourself, because if you're a politician, you must have that sense. You talk to people all over your district, see what you're hearing. Aggregated. Try and talk to the people who aren't of your partisan stripe. What do they think of you?
That's really fascinating. But yeah, so springing off of what you said about how important it is to pay attention to polling, what do you think are the specific statistical trends that you think pollsters should pay more attention to make their polling even better?
I think pollsters need to pay more attention to how low engagement voters are being represented in their polls. There's a subset of voters that just don't pay attention to politics, but they still vote, and we have a very hard time capturing them.
Nice. All right. Very last question. Obviously, I probably don't need to tell you how important it is for people to be civically engaged. I'd probably be preaching to the choir. But let's say that you're talking to some like median audience member of this podcast, someone that is decently politically engaged, probably does follow the news, at least a little bit. What do you want them to know, and what do you think it is most important for them to learn?
I think the most important thing is that whatever gets you likes on Twitter doesn't necessarily, translate into wins. Those are not fully related things. And I think recognizing and remembering that is really important.
Lakshya Jain, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto this podcast. I think you really did live up to the name, the argument. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, make sure to follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that you get your podcasts from. Until next time, goodbye.